Is the grass always greener on the other side? And it sure seems like foreign investors top ticked the recent U.S. markets, looking at foreign investors piling in as the U.S. makes new highs and then starts rolling over. And this is not without precedent. You see this over and over again. It's part of animal spirits, I'd argue. And that's the part that I love about investing. You combine this raw Spock-like logic with this other aspect of like animal spirits. What's the crowd doing? I want to participate. Fear of missing out. And you see this on a global scale. And that's part of the reason why I love this game. It's this combination of logic and psychology. And you see this over and over again, that when a market is doing well, you get global interest to say, hey, foreign investors start getting interested in that given market. And, you actually hear it about in several stories with Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. He talked about, I believe in his PayPal days, a foreign investor sent over several $1,000,000 and was just like, here, take my money. I want to participate in whatever you're doing. And he's like, wait a second, there's not even a term sheet. There's not even deal terms with this money. You're just sending me money. And he had very similar type of experience. Andy Kessler, highly recommended. He's talked about his own stories and as well as running money back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And he also has a regular op-ed in Wall Street Journal. But here, he talked about he and his partner, when they were running their fund, they had real difficulty raising money at first, but after several years, fantastic record. Then within a few months of the dot-com peak, they were offered like $1 billion on a regular basis. And they're like, okay, that's the bell. That is the sign that this is it, because so much money is looking to go into it. And it does look like this type of behavior when foreign investors are just so eager to move in that usually top ticks the market. And so let's actually see what the data suggests about that. If this is your first time tuning in, my name is Daniel. You're watching Unrivaled Investing, a no-hype mission-focused channel trying to find you exceptional companies and unrivaled investments. In full disclosure, this is not financial advice. And so you can see here, this is a chart, looks like, where you can see the foreign investment in U.S. equities has peaked several times in the past. And usually when it peaked, it often correlated nearly exactly with the prior peaks in the markets. And this doesn't really surprise me at all, which is that, when things are going really well, you're going to have a lot of foreign interest saying, hey, I want to participate as well. And this is what I mean. You get that fear of missing out on a global scale. And the challenge is that this is yet another data point pointing to a potential peak in the U.S. markets. You look at margin debt also exploded recently. And whenever you see that margin debt profile dramatically, that growth changed dramatically from significant growth to start declining, that's when you start having this dramatic declines in the market. We're not quite there yet based on the recent data, because it's still actually growing, the yearly change in margin debt. But once you cross into that, that break even or negative point, it really does reflect, okay, this is where you start having to deal with liquidations and things like that. But once you do have this sort of dramatic deceleration in growth, it does mean that it's going to be harder for the market to grow. I mean, it all this money sort of funneled in, people pumping things up. I'm going to buy it on debt. And now it's like, wait a second, this isn't working out. And so all these momentum investors, stepping away from it. And you see that once again with the prior peaks, the prior peaks example with foreign investments. You saw it, with the great financial crisis. You also saw it with the dot-com bubble. Once again, you're seeing it, great financial crisis, dot-com bubble. I'd argue now you're seeing it with the everything bubble. And you see that also with valuations as well. U.S. markets continue to make extremely high record valuations. So another data point suggesting, you're probably looking at, foreign investors, as well as many other investors, top ticking the market, piling in when it's actually the exact worst time to do so. And here it is, Vanguard, which makes a series of indexes that many passive investors invest into. They call out what they expect the future returns to be. And this is the reason why I'm so cautious on a lot of folks saying, I'm just going to pile into, let's say US ETFs right now. I'm going to pile into that US growth ETF because it's low fee and I'm really confident in US growth. But the challenge is that you always need to look at valuations as well as the underlying fundamentals. You need to look at both of those components when you're looking at, future performance. And here it is. This is Vanguard's outlook for the next 10 years. Their prior outlooks are very, very close to, how it performs, because the reality is on a basket basis, fundamental growth doesn't change that much over a multi-year period. And so really the swings you get are around sentiment, around that valuation. metric. And so if you take, let's say, an average multiple and say, hey, 10 years from now, you're going to be closer to that average multiple that you've seen over several decades, then you can sort of get a ballpark figure for what returns look like. And because U.S. multiples have gotten bid up so significantly, you can see all these various different U.S. ETF products that Vanguard effectively markets, saying this is their forecast. Keep in mind, folks, this is for the underlying products that they effectively sell to passive investors, saying, look, yeah, we're not actually looking at great returns. We're talking about very, very low single digits. U.S. growth is effectively zero. But if you look abroad, you look at international assets, global ex-United States equities, you're actually looking at slightly better, still not crazy compelling, 6% versus, let's say, 2 to 3%. But still, it just does show you that here it is. This is a, everyone piled into U.S., pushing U.S. asset prices, future returns down, whereas the global returns will likely be somewhat better. At least that's the way Vanguard's spinning it. And this is why I'm personally extremely interested in what are the unrivaled companies that are foreign that seem like they're cheap right now. What are the international players that trade, let's say, on the London Stock Exchange, or trade in Australia, or trade in Hong Kong? Looking at different exchanges. It doesn't have to be those three. Somewhere in the world where here it is, they have financials that are easy to understand. Maybe you have some significant inside ownership, significant free cash flow, secular tailwinds, great balance sheet. I want to know what are those best international companies and what are the best international investors. So feel free to leave a comment below. Maybe I'll create a channel exclusively in the unrivaledinvesting.com. We have a Discord dedicated to trying to find exceptional companies and talk about them. So maybe I'll create a separate channel just talking about, hey, what are the best potential international companies out there? Because I really want to encourage this, because I think this is probably going to be, as Vanguard calls out themselves, this is probably going to be the honeypot in the next few years, especially as you've seen international investors sort of pile into U.S. at arguably the exact wrong time. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a big fan of international investors because, at the end of the day, you want to have more and more international investment, because that ideally, in theory, prevents, ideally lowers international conflict. Hey, you have this global audience of investors, that you really want to screw them over and create problems. No, so in theory, you're less likely, to have conflicts like that. In theory, the reality versus theory is oftentimes different. But it is worth understanding that sort of dynamic and recognizing, okay, everyone has piled into the U.S., and so if everyone's on that side, tipping the boat one way, it does create this potential opportunity in foreign equity. So I'm very curious, are there potential opportunities over there? And I'd love to hear what are the best companies that are out there. If this video has been helpful for you, please make a point of hitting that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for tuning in.